The ballroom was the kind of place that made ordinary people feel small. Crystal chandeliers hung from ceilings that seemed to touch the clouds. Waiters in white gloves moved between guests like ghosts, carrying champagne flutes that caught the light and scattered it like diamonds across the marble floor. Every face in that room belonged to someone: powerful board members, investors, business heirs, and the kind of people whose names appeared on the sides of buildings. And then there was me, Emma Caldwell, marketing strategist, daughter of a schoolteacher from Atlanta. Wearing a gown I had spent 3 weeks' salary on, standing next to a man who, 4 weeks ago, had been nothing more than a name on the top floor of the building where I worked. I had my chin up, my heels were steady on the marble, my expression was composed. I had practiced that composure in the mirror that morning, and I wore it like armor. But inside? Inside, I was holding my breath. Because across the room, cutting through the crowd of powerful people like a knife through silk, was a face I had hoped never to see again. Marcus, my ex-fiancé. The man who had once told me I was the most important person in his world, and then spent 2 years systematically dismantling every piece of my confidence. The man I had finally, painfully, walked away from. He was smiling at me, that slow, knowing smile that used to make me feel special and now made my stomach turn. He crossed the room with the ease of someone who had planned exactly this moment. When he stopped in front of me, his eyes moved over my gown, over the pearls at my ears, over the space beside me where Jung-woo had stepped away to speak with a senior investor. He tilted his head. "You look beautiful, Emma, though I have to wonder who you dressed up for tonight. Certainly not yourself." I kept my face still. I had learned that from months of being around Jung-woo. Stillness was its own kind of power. "I dressed for myself, Marcus. I always have." He laughed softly, like I had said something adorable and foolish. Still so stubborn, some things never change. He stepped a little closer. His voice dropped, but not low enough. People nearby could hear him perfectly. I realized suddenly, with a cold clarity, that he had planned it this way. I have to say, I admire the performance. Really. Pretending to be the CEO's girlfriend. That takes nerve. But Emma, everyone in this room knows what this is. You're a prop. A convenient distraction. And the moment he doesn't need you anymore, you'll be back where you started. The room seemed to go still. I could feel eyes turning toward us. That particular, terrible kind of attention that comes when someone says something cruel enough to make the air change. My hands were cold. My heart was hammering against my ribs. But I kept my face composed. I kept my chin up. And I opened my mouth to respond. I never got the chance. Because a hand warm, steady, certain came to rest at the small of my back. And a voice that could silence a room without ever raising its volume said, quietly and clearly, "Is there something I can help you with?" I didn't need to turn around to know who was standing behind me. Jung-woo had come back. He stepped forward until he was standing beside me, close enough that his shoulder brushed mine. He looked at Marcus with the kind of calm that was more intimidating than any anger could have been. The look of a man who was not afraid, not threatened, and not remotely impressed. Marcus recovered quickly. He extended a hand. "Marcus Hale. Emma and I have history. I was just catching up with her." Jung-woo did not take the offered hand. He simply looked at it, then looked back at Marcus's face. "I know who you are," he said, "and I know what you were saying. I heard every word." The silence in our small corner of the ballroom was deafening. Emma is not a prop. She is not a performance. She is not a convenient anything. His voice was quiet. It was always quiet, but it carried. "And if you speak to her that way again, in this room or anywhere else, I will make certain this is the last industry event you are invited to attend." Marcus stared at him. Something moved across his face, surprise, then resentment, then the careful recalibration of a man who understood he had miscalculated. He smiled tightly, nodded once, and walked away. Jung-woo watched him go. Then he turned to me. His expression shifted just slightly, just enough that I could see the question in his eyes. "Are you all right?" My throat was tight. My eyes were stinging slightly in a way I absolutely refused to give in to. "I'm fine," I said. He looked at me for a long moment. Then, quietly, "You don't have to be fine right now. Not with me." Something cracked just a little somewhere behind my ribs. I looked at this man standing beside me. This infuriating, controlled, quietly devastating man who had waltzed into my life 4 weeks ago with a proposal I should have refused. This man who was supposed to be my boss, my temporary arrangement, my business agreement. And I thought, when did this stop feeling like pretend? To understand how I ended up in that moment, standing in a ballroom in a borrowed gown with a cracked heart and a man who was supposed to be nothing more than a contract, we need to go back. 3 weeks earlier, my office was on the 14th floor. Not the top floor that was the executive level, shrouded in the kind of quiet authority that filtered down through the building like cold air from a vent. But the 14th floor was mine, and I had made it matter. I had been with Han Global, one of Korea's most powerful international corporations, for 3 years. I had come in as a junior strategist, one of only a handful of American hires, and one of even fewer Black women in the marketing division. I had known, walking through those glass doors for the first time, that I would have to work twice as hard to be seen half as clearly. So I did. I learned the company's structure inside and out. I studied the market positioning of every brand under the Han Global umbrella. I wrote proposals that nobody asked for, left them on the desks of people who needed them, and waited. When the Korean beauty division needed a North American launch strategy, I had one ready. When the tech subsidiary needed a rebrand, I had concepts ready before the meeting even started. 3 years in, I was a senior marketing strategist with a reputation that had moved quietly but firmly through the company. Emma Caldwell was the one you called when something needed to actually work. My life was clean, organized, under control. I had a small apartment I loved, a best friend named Jade who kept me human, and a routine that felt like a fortress I had built around myself. I needed the fortress. Because 18 months ago, I had walked away from a 2-year engagement and spent 6 of those 18 months quietly rebuilding. Marcus had not broken me. I refused to use that word, but he had left marks. The kind you don't see from the outside. The kind that live in the way you second-guess yourself at 3 in the morning. The kind that make you hold people at arm's length because you remember exactly what it felt like when someone you trusted completely used every soft thing you'd shown him as a weapon. I had rebuilt. I was good. I just wasn't looking for anything or anyone, which was why, on a Tuesday morning in late September, when my phone rang with a call from the executive assistant on the top floor, I assumed it was about a project. It was not about a project. The executive floor felt different from the rest of the building. The carpet was thicker, the light was warmer, the air smelled faintly of something expensive and quiet, like old wood and fresh paper. The assistants at their desks moved with careful efficiency, and every person I passed gave off that particular energy of someone who understood that they were operating in a space where small mistakes had large consequences. I had been on this floor exactly twice before, both times, to deliver materials to a senior vice president. I had never had reason to go further. Today, I was being taken all the way to the end of the hall. The assistant, a composed young Korean woman named Soo-yeon, who I had always found terrifyingly efficient, stopped at a set of double doors and knocked twice. "Come in," said a voice from inside. She opened the door and stepped back. I walked in. The office was large and sparse in a way that felt intentional rather than empty. Floor-to-ceiling windows looked out over the city. A single wide desk sat at the far end of the room, dark wood, completely clear except for a laptop and a single file folder. A few chairs were arranged for meetings. On one wall, a whiteboard. On another, nothing at all. The man behind the desk stood as I entered. Kang Jung-woo. I had seen him in company-wide meetings twice. On screens, during video conferences more often than that. In photographs, in corporate communications. I had formed an impression, the way you form impressions of powerful people who exist in a part of the building you don't occupy. Distant, composed, vaguely intimidating. In person, the impression needed revising. He was tall, taller than I expected, lean, but with a quiet physical presence that made the room feel slightly smaller. He was dressed in a charcoal suit with no tie, the top button of his shirt open. He had the kind of face that was interesting rather than simply handsome sharp jaw, dark eyes that were alert and still at the same time, expression revealing nothing. He looked at me the way people rarely looked at me in professional settings, like he was actually seeing me. Not performing the act of looking, not glancing and categorizing and moving on. Actually, carefully looking. It was unsettling in a way I immediately decided to ignore. "Miss Caldwell," he said, "please sit down." I sat. He sat. He opened the file folder in front of him, glanced at something, then closed it again. "You developed the North American launch strategy for Han Beauty last spring," he said. It wasn't a question, but I answered it anyway. Yes. "The one that resulted in a 38% increase in first quarter sales." Yes. "And the rebranding concept for Han Tech's consumer division. That was also yours." "It was a team project," I said automatically. He looked at me. "The lead concept was yours. The team executed your vision." I paused. "That was true." I said nothing. "I also read the market analysis you submitted informally to Director Park 3 months ago. The one he didn't formally respond to." I went still. That analysis had been a risk. I had written it because I saw a gap in the company's strategy and couldn't not write it. Director Park had accepted it with a polite nod and, as far as I knew, filed it somewhere and forgotten about it. I had assumed it had disappeared quietly. "You read that?" "I read everything," he said simply. As if that were obvious. As if the idea that the CEO of a multinational corporation would be reading informal memos from a mid-level strategist on the 14th floor required no explanation at all. He leaned back slightly in his chair. "Your instincts are good, Miss Caldwell. You understand how Western consumers think in a way that most of the marketing division does not. You are also, based on everything I have observed, someone who says what she means." I wasn't sure if that was a compliment or a warning. "I try to be," I said carefully. "Good." He was quiet for a moment. Something shifted in his expression, subtle, almost imperceptible. If I hadn't been watching closely, I would have missed it. "I have a proposition for you. It is unrelated to your work in the marketing division. It is personal in nature, and it is entirely optional. You may refuse without any professional consequence." I looked at him. "All right, I need a girlfriend," he said. His tone was exactly as calm and measured as if he had said he needed a spreadsheet reviewed. The silence that followed was very loud. "I beg your pardon?" To his credit, he didn't flinch at my expression. He explained it with the same quiet, methodical clarity he probably brought to every strategic decision he made. His family, specifically his parents, and a powerful business associate named Chairman Yoon, had been pressing for an arranged marriage alliance for the past several months. The intended bride was Chairman Yoon's daughter, a woman named Ji-yeon. The match was not romantic. It was financial and political, designed to solidify a business merger that both families wanted. Jung-woo did not want it. Not because of any particular objection to Ji-yeon herself, he spoke of her without malice, but because he had no interest in a marriage that was a business transaction, and because he believed, very simply, that it was not the right path for him. However, refusing outright had consequences. His family would escalate. Chairman Yoon would take the refusal as a personal slight that could damage ongoing business negotiations. The pressure would not stop, it would intensify. What he needed was a reason that could not be argued with. A relationship. If I appear publicly in a serious relationship, the arranged marriage conversation loses ground. My parents cannot easily insist on a formal engagement when I am already clearly committed to someone. Chairman Yoon will be forced to accept it as a matter of personal circumstances rather than a rejection. I stared at him. "And you came to me because?" "Because you are intelligent, professional, and composed under pressure. Because you are not part of my social circle and therefore have no personal stake that would complicate the arrangement. And because," he paused, "just slightly, you were the most logical choice." I looked at this man sitting across from me, this powerful, controlled, frankly beautiful man who had just told me I was the most logical choice for a fake relationship, with the same energy he might use to explain a market analysis. "No," I said. He blinked. It was the most surprised he had looked since I walked in. "No? No, I am not going to pretend to be your girlfriend. I work for this company. If it comes out, and things like this always come out, my professional reputation takes the damage, not yours. You're the CEO. I'm a mid-level strategist. Those outcomes are not equal. I would ensure you are protected professionally. You can't guarantee that. You can't guarantee how people will interpret it. You can't guarantee that the optics don't hurt me regardless of your intentions." He was quiet for a moment. "What would make you feel protected?" I almost said nothing would, but something about the question, the genuine, careful way he asked it, made me pause. I thought about it, against my better judgment. A written agreement, specific parameters for what is and is not required of me, a clear end date, and my name on the Han Tech project, officially the one that's going to presentation next quarter. I wrote the lead strategy. I want the credit documented. He looked at me steadily. "Done. And if this damages my reputation in any way, I reserve the right to—" "Done," he said again, quieter. "You haven't heard my terms yet. Miss Caldwell, I will agree to any reasonable professional safeguard you name. I am not trying to harm you. I am trying to solve a problem. You are, as I have already noted, the most logical person to help me do that. And now that I have heard you argue for yourself—" A very small, very controlled, almost smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. "I am even more certain of that." I looked at him. My brain said, "Walk out the door." Some other part of me, some traitorous, reckless, deeply unwise part, said, "Fine. 6 weeks," I said. "Maximum." Agreed. "We are colleagues in public. Nothing inappropriate." Agreed. "And I keep the right to end this at any time if I feel it's harming me." He nodded once. Agreed. I stood up. He stood with me, that automatic, old-fashioned courtesy that I had not expected and that I absolutely refused to find charming. "We'll start Friday," he said. "There's a corporate dinner. It would be the appropriate first appearance." I picked up my bag. "Fine," I said. I walked out of his office, down the hall, into the elevator, and all the way back to my desk on the 14th floor. Then I put my face in my hands and thought, "Emma, what have you done?" The car he sent for me was quiet and impossibly smooth, like being moved through the city on a current of air. I wore a deep burgundy dress that Jade had helped me choose, because Jade had spent 20 minutes reminding me that I was not just doing a job, I was performing one, and performance required costume. She had also spent 15 of those minutes alternating between being deeply concerned for my professional sanity and deeply fascinated by the whole situation, which was very Jade. "Just promise me you know what you're doing," she had said as I left. "I know exactly what I'm doing," I had said, with the confidence of someone who had absolutely no idea what she was doing. Jung-woo was waiting at the entrance of the restaurant when the car pulled up. He was in a black suit, and the moment he saw me step out, he came down the steps to meet me. That was the first surprise. I had expected him to stand and wait. He came to me. He came to me with purpose, like it was simply the natural thing to do. And he stopped at a distance that was close enough to feel like something, but correct enough to be nothing. "You look exceptional," he said quietly. Not a performance. Not said for anyone else's benefit. There was no one close enough to hear it. He said it because apparently he meant it, and he was someone who said the things he meant. I felt heat move up the back of my neck, and was deeply grateful for my composure. "Thank you, shall we?" He held out his arm. I took it, and we walked in. The corporate dinner was attended by about 40 people, senior executives, business partners, a handful of investors from the Korean parent company. The restaurant was a private booking, beautifully lit, round tables with white linens and soft centerpieces. And the moment we walked through the door together, I felt the air shift. Heads turned, just slightly. That small, involuntary turning that happens when something unexpected appears. I saw eyes moving between us, calculating, reassessing. I kept my expression easy and my posture straight. Jung-woo guided me to our table, with his hand at the back of my chair, not touching, just present, just indicating. We sat. We spoke with the people around us. I used every skill I had spent years developing. Listening well, asking the right questions, redirecting conversations elegantly, making people feel interesting. About 40 minutes in, the CFO, a man named Director Han, who had the energy of someone who collected information and filed it carefully for future use, leaned toward Jung-woo and said something in Korean that I didn't fully catch. Jung-woo replied calmly. Director Han looked at me with a new kind of attention and said, in English, "Miss Caldwell, I understand you are responsible for the Han Beauty North American numbers." We talked about that for several minutes. I was in familiar territory, and it showed. At some point during that conversation, Jung-woo shifted in his chair, and his hand covered mine on the table. Just like that, quietly, casually, like it was something he did, like our hands had been finding each other for years. His palm was warm, his fingers curled slightly around mine. He didn't look at me. He was still talking to Director Han, expression perfectly composed, as if he had not just caused every nerve in my right hand to go into immediate crisis. I did not pull away. That would have been visible. I kept my face steady and thought very loudly about staying professional. Director Han glanced at our joined hands and settled back in his chair with the particular satisfaction of someone who had just confirmed a theory. Later, when we were in the car back, I said, "You didn't warn me you were going to do that." Jung-woo looked at me. Something very small moved at the corner of his mouth. It was natural. It would have looked strange if I hadn't. "You could have given me a signal. You handled it perfectly. That is not the point. You didn't pull away." I looked out the window. I was being professional. The silence stretched. When I glanced back at him, he was looking at the city outside, expression calm. But there was something in the line of his profile, something that might, in a certain light, have been amusement. I looked back out the window. My hand was still warm. The weeks that followed operated on a rhythm I hadn't anticipated. We appeared together at 2 more public events. We had lunch twice, once because it was strategically necessary for us to be seen in the company restaurant, and once because he called my desk at 12:30 and said he was going to the quiet Italian place 3 blocks away, and asked if I wanted to come, and something in me said yes before my brain could weigh in. There was a pattern to how he was in public versus how he was when it was just the 2 of us. In public, he was everything his reputation suggested: composed, authoritative, carefully attentive to me in ways that read as romantic without ever crossing into territory that made me uncomfortable. He would touch the back of my chair. He would lean slightly toward me when I spoke. He would catch my eye across a room in a way that felt private even in a crowd. Alone, he was different. Not warmer, exactly, but the controlled quality shifted. He asked me real questions. He listened in a way that felt like attention, not politeness. He pushed back when he disagreed with me, which I found irritating and also, quietly, refreshing. And he teased me. That was the part I had not prepared for. One afternoon, I came up to the executive floor to review some materials with Soo-yeon, and Jung-woo appeared in the corridor as I was leaving. He stopped. He looked at the stack of folders I was carrying. "You carry your own files," he said, as if observing something mildly puzzling. "I always have. We have assistants. I know where everything is if I carry it myself." He reached out and took the stack from me before I could object. I stared at him. "Those are mine. I'll walk you to the elevator." He walked beside me down the corridor, carrying my files without any apparent self-consciousness. I was deeply aware of the assistants and staff we passed, of the quiet but definite weight of their attention. "This is unnecessary," I said under my breath. "Probably," he agreed pleasantly. "People are watching." "Yes, that is generally the point." I pressed the elevator button. He handed my files back, and when I reached for them, he held them just a half-second longer than necessary, just long enough that my hand covered his before he let go. I yanked the folders to my chest. When I looked up, he was watching me. Not smiling, exactly, but there was something in his expression, something quiet and knowing and slightly insufferable. "Have a good afternoon, Miss Caldwell. It's Emma." I snapped, because I was annoyed. The corner of his mouth moved. Emma, he said. Just that. Just my name. But in a tone that did something deeply unreasonable to my composure. The elevator opened. I got in. The doors closed. I leaned against the back wall and breathed. This was fine. This was manageable. This was a professional arrangement. There was another moment, the one I thought about more than I should have. We were preparing for a presentation together, working late in a small conference room. The building was mostly empty. We had been reviewing materials for a few hours, and somewhere around 9 o'clock, I stood up to stretch, walked to the window, and looked out at the city. I heard him stand. I heard him walk. He stopped behind me, not quite touching, but close enough that I could feel the warmth of him. I kept my eyes on the city. "What are you thinking?" he asked. His voice was quiet. We were in an empty building. There was no reason for the performance. That it's late, and I'm tired, and I still have 2 sections of this proposal to finalize. That's what you're thinking? I looked at his reflection in the dark glass of the window. He was looking at mine. What do you want me to be thinking? He was quiet for a moment. Nothing, he said finally. Never mind. He stepped back. He returned to the table. After a moment, I did too, but something in the room felt different after that. Warmer. Like something had shifted, and neither of us was going to acknowledge it. I was very careful, after that, not to stand near windows when he was in the room. The almost kiss happened on a Wednesday. We had been at a small charity reception, and there had been a moment on the way out where we stood by the coat check and I was laughing at something, genuinely laughing, which surprised me, because I hadn't thought our conversation was heading somewhere funny. And then it was, suddenly, and the laugh caught me off guard. When I looked back at him, he was watching me. That kind of watching that isn't passive. That kind that feels like something pressing against the air between you. He lifted his hand and, very slowly, very deliberately, tucked a strand of hair back from my cheek. His fingers barely grazed my face. It was nothing. It was devastating. He leaned forward, just slightly, just enough that for one suspended, breathless second I thought. He stopped. He straightened. He stepped back. "Your coat," he said, and helped me put it on. I didn't say anything. My heart was hammering. My face was very warm. I told myself it was the sudden cold of the night air when we stepped outside. I was not convincing. He appeared at a company mixer on a Thursday evening. Marcus had always been able to move through professional spaces with ease. He was charming in the specific, surface-level way that worked at events like this, where depth wasn't required and everyone was already performing some version of themselves. He had connections across industries, and I should not have been surprised to see him at something Han Global was co-hosting with a partner organization. But I was surprised, painfully surprised, the kind that lodges under your ribs. He found me within 20 minutes. He always had a way of finding me. "Emma, you look incredible." I turned. I kept my face neutral. "Marcus, don't give me that look. I just want to talk." He stepped closer. His voice was warm, familiar, the voice I had once found comforting. Now it landed differently. "I heard a rumor you're seeing the CEO, Kang Jung-woo. People talk. Emma." He tilted his head. That gesture. I knew that gesture, the careful, almost tender gesture he used when he wanted to make me feel like he was the only one who truly understood me. "I know you. I know when you're performing something. And this, whatever this is, it doesn't look like you. You don't know me the way you think you do. I know that men like Kang Jung-woo don't actually choose women like Marcus," I said, and my voice was very quiet and very clear. "Finish that sentence carefully." He stopped. His expression shifted just slightly. Calculated. "I just mean that these situations rarely end well, for the person with less power in them." "I appreciate your concern," I said, in a tone that meant the opposite. "I'm serious, Emma. He's going to discard you when it's convenient. That's what people like him do. Good night, Marcus." I walked away. My hands were perfectly steady. I was very proud of that. But something he had said was burrowing in, not because it was true, but because it touched something I had been carefully not looking at. The part of me that knew this was an arrangement, the part that kept reminding me, 6 weeks, and then you go back to your life. The part that had started to feel, somewhere in the last few weeks, that going back to my life might leave something behind. I did not examine that feeling. I was very busy not examining it. The next time Marcus appeared was at a business luncheon 2 days later. He had maneuvered himself into a table near ours, not quite close enough to be obvious, but close enough to watch. I noticed immediately. I said nothing and kept my attention on the conversation at our table. Jung-woo noticed within 5 minutes. I know because his posture shifted slightly, that small, controlled tension that appeared in him when he was paying close attention to something and did not want anyone to know he was paying close attention. And because his hand found my elbow under the table, briefly, a quiet check. You all right? I barely nodded. When Marcus crossed the room toward the end of lunch, I saw Jung-woo's expression change, not dramatically, not visibly to anyone who wasn't watching closely. But I was watching closely. He stood up before I did. He intercepted Marcus before Marcus reached me. I watched him extend a hand, say something low and cordial. Marcus shook it. They spoke for about 30 seconds. I could not hear the words, but I could read the body language. Marcus, recalibrating again. Jung-woo, completely at ease. The particular ease of a man who holds more cards than the person he's speaking to, and they both know it. Marcus glanced at me once, nodded, and went back to his table. Jung-woo returned to his seat. He said nothing about it. He picked up his conversation with the investor across from us, as if he had simply stepped away to take a phone call. What did you say to him? I asked later. In the car. I introduced myself. That's all? I told him I was glad he and you had remained on civil terms after your engagement ended, and that I hoped he understood how important your peace of mind was to me. I stared at him. That's not. He'll know that was a warning. Yes. Jung-woo agreed, looking out the window. He will. I made a mistake, not a large one, not one that had consequences, in the end, but a mistake. I agreed to speak with Marcus privately. He called me my personal phone, which he still had, and asked if we could meet, not publicly, just to talk. He said he had been thinking about what happened between us. He said he wanted to apologize properly. He was careful to say all the right things. I knew, in some part of me, that I should say no, but the part of me that had spent 18 months processing what those 2 years had done to my heart was still curious about the apology I had never gotten. Still wanted, maybe, to hear him say the words. We met in a quiet cafe near my apartment on a Saturday afternoon. I sat across from him and listened. He was careful and measured and said some things that were almost right, some things that sounded like genuine reflection. And then, slowly, he started moving back toward the old patterns, the subtle diminishments dressed as concern, the suggestions that I wasn't thinking clearly, the implication that his judgment of my situation was more reliable than mine. I recognized it this time in a way I hadn't always been able to. I said I had to go. I left. What I hadn't known was that Jung-woo had a meeting nearby. What I hadn't expected was that he had driven past the cafe and seen me through the window. He had seen me sitting across from Marcus. He didn't say anything immediately. Not that day, not the next. But on Monday morning, when I went up to the executive floor to review the presentation materials, something was different. He was more contained, more careful. The slight looseness that had developed between us, the teasing, the small moments had tightened back up. At the end of the meeting, when everyone else had filed out and it was just the two of us in the conference room, he closed the folder in front of him. You met with him. It wasn't a question. I didn't pretend not to understand. I did. Privately, yes. He was quiet for a moment. He looked at the window. His jaw was set in a way I hadn't quite seen before. That's your decision to make, he said. His voice was measured, careful. It is. I agreed. Another silence. Did he stopped. He recalibrated. He started again. Was it a productive conversation? I looked at him. I looked at the careful, controlled way he was holding himself. At the tension in his shoulders that he was not quite managing to hide. No, I said honestly. It wasn't. Something in his posture shifted, very slightly. He nodded once. I see. He picked up his folder. He stood. Emma. He stopped at the door. He turned back. His expression was different. Open, in the cautious way of someone who does not open easily. If he says anything that makes you feel the way he apparently used to make you feel, you don't have to manage that alone. You understand? I looked at him for a long moment. We have a contract, I said quietly. He held my gaze. Yes, we do. He left. I sat in the empty conference room for a few minutes. The contract, I thought. Right. The contract. I thought about the contract a lot less, these days, than I thought about the way he had said my name. It happened after a company event ran late, and we found ourselves in a car in the rain, the city lights smearing the windows, both of us quiet and tired in the particular way that drops defenses. He had been unusually quiet all evening. I had been too. There was a new weight to the silence between us, heavier than before, warmer, harder to ignore. Can I ask you something? He said. How long were you engaged? I turned to look at him. He was watching the rain. 2 years. Engaged for 1, together for 2 total. What happened? I was quiet for a moment. Usually I had a version of the answer that was short and sufficient. We wanted different things. We grew apart. The usual socially acceptable summary. But I was tired, and the rain was doing something to my defenses, and he had been patient with me in ways I hadn't expected and hadn't asked for. He made me feel like my judgment couldn't be trusted, I said. Slowly, in small ways, he would question my decisions, suggest I was overreacting, remind me that he knew the situation better than I did. By the end of the first year, I was checking every instinct I had against his approval. I didn't notice it happening. I just noticed, one day, that I had stopped trusting myself. Silence. And then I noticed. And then I left. I looked back at the rain. It took another 6 months after that to feel like myself again, to trust my own thinking, my own choices. He was quiet for a long time. You are, he said finally, one of the clearest thinkers I have ever worked with. Your instincts are almost always correct. I looked at him. Thank you. I'm not saying it to be kind. I'm saying it because it's true, and because I think you should hear it. Something tightened in my throat, something soft and inconvenient. I looked back at the window. Jung-woo. Yes. This arrangement. Don't, he said quietly. Don't what? Whatever you were about to say to rebuild the distance. Don't. I turned to look at him. He was still watching the rain, his profile in the dark. I didn't say anything else. Neither did he. The car carried us home through the rain, and I sat with the warmth of him beside me and did not rebuild any distance at all. The gala was the event of the season for Han Global, a major charity event attended by investors, board members, and partners from both Korea and the United States. It was high stakes in every direction. I had known Marcus would be there. I had prepared for it the way I prepared for anything difficult. I decided what I would not allow, and I held to it. But I hadn't fully anticipated his strategy. He had spent the weeks since our cafe meeting thinking. He had gathered information I found out later. He had spoken to 2 people in the company who knew me professionally, probing for inconsistencies, for the cracks in the story. He came to the gala with evidence he thought he had, and a plan. Jung-woo had stepped away to speak with a senior investor. Marcus moved in immediately. He didn't just stop at our small confrontation. He made sure other people heard. He made sure the conversation happened in a location where it would be noticed, and he timed it precisely. What he said was what I told you at the beginning. A prop, a performance, a convenient distraction. And then, just as I had gathered myself to respond, the warmth at the small of my back told me I didn't have to do it alone. The room was very quiet. Jung-woo had said what he said, and Marcus had walked away, and the guests nearby had the particular stillness of people absorbing something they will be talking about for weeks. Jung-woo didn't give them time to settle into it. He turned his attention back to the room with the ease of someone moving past an interruption, greeted the nearest investors, and guided me smoothly into a fresh conversation that had nothing to do with what had just happened. He was extraordinary at that, the management of social weather. The quiet authority that could make a storm feel like a light wind. It was only later, when we had reached the quieter edge of the room, that Marcus made one more attempt. He had found courage somewhere, or foolishness, and he came back. And this time he spoke loudly enough to make certain he had an audience. "I have emails," he said, standing several feet away, voice raised just enough, from people in the building. This relationship started the same week she was brought into an executive meeting with no clear business reason. It started the same week she got credit for a project she'd been working on for months, without recognition. This is an arrangement. She traded something to get something. And every person in this room deserves to know. Mr. Hale. Jung-woo's voice was not loud. It did not need to be. It simply cut through everything else, like a clean line through noise. The room went fully quiet. Jung-woo stepped forward. "You are describing a woman who advocated for herself professionally, and who is in a relationship with me. You are framing both of those things as disqualifying. You are doing this publicly, at an event where she is a guest, in a room full of her colleagues, and you are doing it because she left you." Marcus's face went tight. "This has nothing to do with. It has everything to do with it. You have been attempting to undermine her credibility since you arrived in this building. You have positioned every professional success she has had as evidence of manipulation. You have described her as a prop, a performance, a convenience, because that is how you need to see her. Because seeing her clearly would require admitting what you actually did to her." The silence was absolute. Emma is not a prop. She is not a strategy. She is the most capable person in this room, and she has been so for 3 years, with or without me beside her. I am beside her because I choose to be. Because I, not a contract, not a convenience, not an arrangement, chose her. He paused. "I will not let you belong to someone who does not deserve you." He said it looking at Marcus, but when he finished, he turned to me. His eyes found mine. "And I knew in the particular way you know things that have been true for a while and that you have simply refused to acknowledge that he wasn't performing anymore. He hadn't been for some time. We left the gala early." Not in crisis. Jung-woo was too composed for anything to look like crisis, but with the particular deliberate calm of two people who understood that the room had heard enough for one evening. In the car, I didn't speak for a long time. I watched the city move past the windows, and I thought about what he had said, and I thought about all the moments in the past 6 weeks, and I thought about the feeling that had been growing quietly in the cavity of my chest, like something decided to take root. And I hadn't noticed until it was already too large to ignore. "Was any of it real?" I asked finally. He looked at me. "Which part are you asking about?" "Any of it." I stopped. I started again. "The way you were, with me, the things you said, the moments that felt like more than the arrangement. Were those real, or were you just very good at the performance?" He was quiet for a long moment. The city moved past us. "I need to tell you something," he said. "When I came to you with the proposal, I said you were the most logical choice. That was true. You were also the only person I wanted to ask." I looked at him. "I had noticed you for longer than I said. The work, yes, that was real. But also the way you moved through that building, the way you handled resistance, the way you spoke to people like they were worth speaking to. I noticed, and I did not act on it because you work for me. And because I am not someone who acts without thought." He looked at his hands. "The proposal was real. The pressure from my family was real. But if I am being honest, and I think this is a moment for honesty, there was part of me that recognized it as an opportunity. To spend time with you outside of a professional context. To be around you long enough to understand whether what I had noticed meant something. And does it?" He looked at me. "Yes." My throat was tight. "Jung-woo, I was not pretending," he said, quietly, clearly, with all the careful precision of someone who means every word. Not the hand at dinner, not the conversations, not the moments you probably spent telling yourself to ignore, not any of it. I was not performing something for an audience. I was trying to show you something and waiting to see if you would let yourself see it. I looked at him for a long time. "This is a terrible idea," I said. My voice was slightly unsteady. Because you work for the company? Because I just finished rebuilding myself after someone I trusted used all my soft parts against me. And you, I know, he said softly. I know that. I am asking you to believe that I am not him. I am asking you to decide not quickly, not right now, not because of what happened tonight, but eventually, whether you are willing to find out. I turned back to the window. My eyes were burning slightly. I refused to acknowledge that. The city was very bright outside. You held my files for me, I said, after a moment. A small pause. I did. And you carried them down the hall even when I told you it was unnecessary. Also correct. And you stopped. At the coat check. You almost… Yes, he said quietly. Why did you stop? He turned to look at me. His expression was open in a way I had seen only rarely, the careful, deliberate openness of someone who has decided to take a risk. Because I wanted it to be real. Not something that could be dismissed as part of the arrangement. When it happened, if it happened, I wanted you to be certain. I looked at him for a long, quiet moment. Something settled in my chest. Something warm and clear and a little bit terrifying. Jung-woo, I said. Yes, take me home. A beat, and then come upstairs. My apartment was quiet. The city was loud below us. We sat on the small couch in my living room with cups of tea that got cold because neither of us was particularly interested in the tea, and we talked for a long time. About real things, his family, my history, what we each were afraid of, and what we each believed was possible. He was honest in the particular way of someone who finds honesty more natural than pretense, but who has learned that the world does not always reward it. He told me about the pressure he had lived under his whole life. To be excellent, to be controlled, to be the person the corporation needed. He told me that the arranged marriage proposal had felt like the final iteration of a long pattern, his choices being made by forces outside himself. You said no to me, he said. There was something in his voice I hadn't heard there before, something almost fond. That first day. Most people don't say no to me. I noticed you seemed surprised. I was also. He stopped, almost smiled. I was impressed. I'm not sure that's the word. It was something else, like something I hadn't been expecting walked into the room. I looked at my cold tea. I thought you were composed to the point of being almost not human. And now? Now I think you are infuriatingly composed. Which is different. He smiled then. A real one, the kind I had seen only in small doses, in unguarded moments. It changed his face in a way that was completely unfair. You are the only person, he said, who has ever told me I am infuriating. To my face. Did you enjoy it? He looked at me. His dark eyes were warm. More than I expected to. I set down the tea. He set down his tea. And when he leaned forward and I didn't move back, when his hand came up and found my jaw the same way he'd almost touched it at the coat check weeks ago, gently, carefully, like something he'd been waiting to do and wanted to do right, I understood that this was the moment he had meant. Not the arrangement. Not the performance, not the beautiful, complicated pretense of it. This, the real thing. When he kissed me, it was quiet and certain, and nothing like pretending. It felt like the answer to a question I hadn't quite known I was asking. When we pulled back, he touched my face. Still think this is a terrible idea? I looked at him. Completely. I said, I'm in. Here is what I know now, that I didn't know at the beginning. Love doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it arrives quietly, wearing the costume of practicality. Sometimes it builds itself in the small spaces, in handed-back files, and window reflections, and almost kisses, deliberately stopped, in the warmth of a hand on a table, and in the way someone says your name like it means something. Marcus had been right that the situation was unequal. He had just been wrong about which direction the inequality ran. Because Jung-woo, who could have had any arrangement, any convenience, any version of what he needed, had chosen me. Not the version of me in a gown at a gala. Not the version that was useful to his strategy. The version that argued back. The version that carried her own files and said no in executive offices, and spent years quietly rebuilding something precious and worth protecting. He had chosen that version of me before I had finished choosing it myself. And I, Emma Caldwell from Atlanta, daughter of a school teacher, marketing strategist on the 14th floor, had chosen a man who was terrifyingly composed and quietly teasing, and who held my hand at dinner like it was the most natural thing in the world. The contract ended weeks ago. What we have now has no end date. And that, I have decided, is exactly right.